T minus 1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. He's your only black friend, so he's your best black friend. No one is waiting for another black friend, because black friends are rare, as you should be aware. He smiles like Richard Pryor, so just sit and stare. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.
Hey everybody, Tyler here. Merry Christmas, everybody watching this live stream. I'm hoping that you guys have an awesome Christmas for this particular year. Now, this Christmas, I decided to talk about the Greek origins of the miracles of Jesus Christ. Now, there's a main reason why I'm doing this particular day to talk about this. Like when you're younger, right? Most people nowadays, of course, don't necessarily believe in the ideas of Santa Claus. And of course, the main reason why people don't necessarily buy into those kind of ideas is largely because they realize that the ideas of Santa Claus, they seem not to be like a humongous possibility. For starter, how is it possible for a guy who is fat to fit underneath the chimney? How is it that he can go across the whole entire world? And so kids at a really young age, they start to apply their own personal critical thinking skills when it comes down to the ideas of Santa Claus. But we don't necessarily apply the same sort of critical thinking skills when it comes down to the ideas of the miracles that are being brought forth by Jesus Christ. And so I hope for this video that I'll show you my argumentation that I have prepared for this whole entire stream. That way that everybody can agree, number one, that Santa Claus cannot do the miracles, and number two, that Jesus Christ cannot do miracles too. Yeah, it's going to be a bit edgy. I'm sure it's going to be a bit edgy, but you know what? I don't necessarily care if it's edgy or not. So let's begin the presentation for this live stream. So here's the slideshow right here. The origins of the miracles of Jesus Christ. Now, this right here is actually an image of like the Sermon on the Mountain. So, without further hesitation, let's begin with the presentation. Now, first and foremost, it's very important to say that Jesus Christ as a man did in fact exist, but it seems as though that gradually over a period of time, the miracles that we attribute to him have gradually changed over time through the game of telephone. So we do have evidence of a historical Jesus, but the argumentation that I'm presenting for this live stream is actually an argumentation against the idea of a magical Jesus. So those two ideas are completely separate. So what are the historical evidence that we do have for historical Jesus? This comes directly from Josephus talking about the various information that we have for Jesus Christ. It says right here that around this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performs surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accepted the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when upon the accusation of the principal man among us, Pontius Pilate has condemned him to a cross, those who have came first to have come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God have foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribes of the Christians, so called after them, has still to this day has not disappeared. Again, this quotation comes directly from Josephus as one particular evidence for the existence of a historical Jesus. Now, this comes directly from Tacitus. It says right here, but all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and of the preposterous of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the corrugation was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most excruciating torture on a class hated for the abomination called Christians by the populace. Christus, who was named as had its origin, suffered an extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our persecutors. Pontius Pilate and a mischievous superstition then checked for the moment and again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but in Rome, where all those things hideous and shameful for every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was made first who pled guilty, then upon the information and intense magnitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, of a hatred against mankind. So this again is like an evidence of a historical Jesus. So let us respond to the comments before I go even further. Hey there. Hey Spider, how you doing? I hope you're enjoying the live stream so far. But yeah, Merry Christmas to you, man. Merry Christmas. Now, this right here comes directly from a quotation from Quintilian. Now, basically, in this particular quotation, the whole entire context for my argumentation is that students back then, for the ancient Greco-Roman world, actually trained students to rewrite stories that already pre-existed for their particular motifs. And we see like a lot of motifs directly from these kind of stories all the time. Quintilian says right here from Mimicist criticism that there cannot be no doubt in art, at no small proportion art's task lies in imitation, since although invention came first and is all important, it is accepted to imitate whatever has been invented with success. It is the universal rule of all life that we should wish to copy what we approve in others. For this reason, that boy copied the shapes of the letters that may learn to write, and that the musicians take the voices of their teachers, painters of the work of their predecessors, and peasants the principles of agriculture, which has proven in practice as model for their imitation. In fact, we may note that the elementary study of every branch of learning is directed by reference by some standard that is placed before the learner. So this right here is basically saying that they're trying to train the students to use specific models for their stories. So basically, back then, literacy was not that humongous in comparison to now. But those that were literate, they were actually trained to use certain stories to rewrite stories to make their particular narratives. Now, my main source for my claims for the miracles from Greek mythology and Greek philosophy comes directly from this book. Now, this particular book is actually called Miracles in Greco-Roman Antiquity and was also written down by Wendy Carter. And so, without further hesitation, let's go to the miracles one by one and compare all the miracles to Jesus Christ. The first kind of miracles that we're going to compare to Jesus Christ is the empty tomb narratives. Like everybody knows about the empty tombs. So let's read a quotation out loud. It says right here, according to John chapter 20, verse 6, that Peter Simon came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the spirits of the lion lying there, as well as the cloth that has been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth is still lying in its place, separate from the linen. So let's hear the other stories that actually predates the one for Jesus Christ and play the whole entire video. That way you guys can see what exactly I'm talking about for other stories that predates Jesus Christ for the case of the empty tomb. So let me try to get the video out first, and it seemed to not be working a little bit, so it's going to probably take like a second to get the video out. Let's see. Let me go back one more time. I guess my keyboard was not necessarily working there. So the video for the empty tomb video. So right here. There it goes. Perfect. It's loading up
By
right.
Plutarch. 28, 4-6. At this pass, then, it is said that one of the patricians, a man of noblest birth, and of the most reputable character, a trusted and intimate friend also of Romulus himself, and one of the colonists from Alba, Julius Proculus by name, went into the forum and solemnly swore by the most sacred emblems before all the people that, as he was travelling on the road, he had seen Romulus coming to meet him, fair and stately to the eye as never before, and arrayed in bright and shining armour. He himself, then, affrighted at the sight, had said, O king, what possessed thee, or what purpose hadst thou, that thou hast left us patricians a prey to unjust and wicked accusations, and the whole city sorrowing without end at the loss of its father? Whereupon Romulus had replied, It was the pleasure of the gods, Zero Proculus, from whom I came, that I should be with mankind only a short time, and that after founding a city destined to be the greatest on earth for empire and glory, I should dwell again in heaven. So farewell, and tell the Romans that if they practice self-restraint, and add to it valor, they will reach the utmost heights of human power. And I will be your propitious deity, Quirinus. These things seemed to the Romans worthy of belief, from the character of the man who related them, and from the oath which he had taken. Moreover, some influence from heaven also, akin to inspiration, laid hold upon their emotions, for no man contradicted Proculus, but all put aside suspicion and calumny and prayed to Quirinus, and honored him as a god. Now this is like the fables which the Greeks tell about Aristeus of Proconnesus and Cleomedes of Astyplia. For they say that Aristeus died in a fuller's shop, and that when his friends came to fetch away his body, it had vanished out of sight, and presently certain travellers returning from abroad said they had met Aristeus journeying towards Croton. Cleomedes also, who was of gigantic strength and stature, of uncontrolled temper, and like a madman, is said to have done many deeds of violence, and finally, in a school for boys, he smote with his fist the pillar which supported the roof, broke it in two, and brought down the house. The boys were killed, and Cleomedes, being pursued, took refuge in a great chest, closed the lid down, and held it so fast that many men with their united strength could not pull it up, but when they broke the chest to pieces, the man was not to be found, alive or dead. In their dismay, then, they sent messengers to consult the oracle at Delphi, and the Pythian priestess gave them this answer. Last of the heroes he, Cleomedes, a Styplian. It is said also that the body of Alcmena disappeared, as they were carrying her forth for burial, and a stone was seen lying on the bier instead. In short, many such fables are told by writers who improbably ascribe divinity to the mortal features in human nature, as well as to the divine. At any rate, to reject entirely the divinity of human virtue, were impious and base, but to mix heaven with earth is foolish. Let us therefore take the safe course and grant, with Pindar, that our bodies all must follow death's supreme behest. But something living still survives, an image of life, for this alone comes from the gods. Yes, it comes from them, and to them it returns, not with its body, but only when it is most completely separated and set free from the body, and becomes altogether pure, fleshless, and undefiled. For a dry soul is best, according to Heraclitus, and it flies from the body as lightning flashes from a cloud. But the soul which is contaminated with body, and surfeited with body, like a damp and heavy exhalation, is slow to release itself and slow to rise towards its source. We must not, therefore, violate nature by sending the bodies of good men with their souls to heaven, but implicitly believe that their virtues and their souls, in accordance with nature and divine justice, ascend from men to heroes, from heroes to demigods, and from demigods, after they have been made pure and holy, as in the final rites of initiation, and have freed themselves from mortality and sense to gods, not by civic law, but in very truth and according to right reason, thus achieving the fairest and most blessed consummation.
So that's one example of an empty tomb story directly from Romulus. Now keep in mind that the story of Romulus is also very similar to the story of Cain and Abel, largely because we do in fact know that according to the legends of Romulus, that once upon a time he was actually born with his other brother. They were actually twins according to the story, And what they did in the past was basically suck the breast milk from the animals to actually survive. And much later on in their life, what happened is that they had some sort of brotherly feud in the whole entire story. And so at the later half of the story, that Romulus basically killed his brother, according to the results. So this kind of story is like a continuation of what we have for Romulus in comparison to what I just said right now. So here's the next story that also has a empty tomb story that I'm going to show you guys right here.
Cheerios and Kaliroe. The tomb robbers had been careless in closing the tomb. It was at night. Cheerios and Kaliroe. The tomb robbers had been careless in closing the tomb. It was at night, and they were in a hurry. At the crack of dawn Cheerios turned up at the tomb, ostensibly to offer wreaths and libations, but in fact with the intention of doing away with himself. He could not bear being separated from Kaliroe and thought that death was the only thing that would cure his grief. When he reached the tomb, he found that the stones had been moved and the entrance was open. He was astonished at the sight and overcome by fearful perplexity at what had happened. Rumor, a swift messenger, told the Syracusans this amazing news. They all quickly crowded round the tomb, but no one dared go inside until Hermocrates gave an order to do so. The man who was sent in reported the whole situation accurately. It seemed incredible that even the corpse was not lying there. Then Cheerios himself determined to go in his desire to see Kaliroe again even dead, but though he hunted through the tomb, he could find nothing. Many people could not believe it and went in after him. They were all seized by helplessness. One of those standing there said, "The funeral offerings have been carried off, it is tomb robbers who have done that, but what about the corpse, where is it?" Many different suggestions circulated in the crowd. Cheerios looked towards the heavens, stretched up his arms and cried, "Which of the gods is it, then, who has become my rival in love and carried off Kaliroe and is now keeping her with him, against her will, constrained by a more powerful destiny? That is why she died suddenly, so that she would not realize what was happening. That is how Dionysus took Ariadne from Theseus, how Zeus took Semele. It looks as if I had a goddess for a wife without knowing it, someone above my station. But she should not have left the world so quickly, even for such a reason. Thetis was a goddess, but she stayed with Peleus, and he had a son by her. I have been abandoned at the very height of my love. What is to happen to me? What is to become of me, poor wretch? Should I do away with myself? And who would share my grave? I did have this much to look forward to, in my misfortune, that if I could not continue to share Kaliroe's bed, I should come to share her grave. My lady, I offer my justification for living. You force me to live, because I shall look for you on land and sea, and in the very sky if I can reach there. This I beg of you, my dear, do not flee from me." At this the crowd broke out in lamentation. Everyone began to lament for Kaliroe as though she had just died.
But in a little while, Eumolpus...
By the way, this story right here is actually known as the Satyricon. Now, this whole entire novel is actually really funny, but essentially what happens in the Satyricon, for this particular part, is a story that's also really similar to the Empty Tomb story. This particular story, I believe, came out roughly around 60, I think, AD, if I'm not mistaken. And so this actually, I think, predates the whole entire narrative for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John also came around the same sort of time period, probably after this particular story, if I'm not mistaken. So here's the audio directly from the Satyricon about the particular tomb story that was featured inside.
Mouthpiece of the distressed and author of the present good understanding, fearing that the general good humour might flag for lack of amusement, began to indulge in sneers at the fickleness of women, how easily they fell in love, how readily they forgot even their own sons. No woman could be so chaste but that she could be roused to madness by a chance passion, nor had he need to quote from old tragedies, or to have recourse to names, notorious for centuries. On the contrary, if we care to hear it, he would relate an incident which had occurred within his own memory, whereupon, as we all turned our faces towards him and gave him our attention, he began as follows. There was a certain married lady at Ephesus, once upon a time, so noted for her chastity that she even drew women from the neighbouring states to come to gaze upon her. When she carried out her husband, she was by no means content to comply with the conventional custom and follow the funeral cortege with her hair down, beating her naked breast in sight of the onlookers. She followed the corpse even into the tomb, and, when the body had been placed in the vault, in accordance with the Greek custom, she began to stand vigil over it, weeping day and night. Neither parents nor relations could divert her from punishing herself in this manner and from bringing on death by starvation. The magistrates, the last resort, were rebuffed and went away, and the lady, mourned by all as an unusual example, dragged through the 5th day without nourishment. A most faithful maid was in attendance upon the poor woman. She either wept in company with the afflicted one, or replenished the lamp which was placed in the vault, as the occasion required. Throughout the whole city there was but one opinion. Men of every calling agreed that here shone the one solitary example of chastity and of love. In the meantime, the governor of the province had ordered some robbers crucified near the little vault, in which the lady was bewailing her recent loss. On the following night, a soldier, who was standing guard over the crosses for fear someone might drag down one of the bodies for burial, saw a light shining brightly among the tombs and heard the sobs of someone grieving. A weakness common to mankind made him curious to know who was there and what was going on. So he descended into the tomb, and, catching sight of a most beautiful woman, he stood still, afraid at first that it was some apparition or spirit from the infernal regions. But he finally comprehended the true state of affairs as his eye took in the corpse lying there, and as he noted the tears on the face lacerated by the fingernails, he understood that the lady was unable to endure the loss of the dear departed. He then brought his own scanty ration into the vault, and exhorted the sobbing mourner not to persevere in useless grief, or rend her bosom with unavailing sobs. The same end awaited us all, the same last resting place, and other platitudes by which anguished minds are recalled to sanity. But, oblivious to sympathy, she beat and lacerated her bosom more vehemently than before, and tearing out her hair, she strewed it upon the breast of the corpse. Notwithstanding this, the soldier would not leave off, but persisted in exhorting the unfortunate lady to eat, until the maid, seduced by the smell of the wine, I suppose, was herself overcome, and stretched out her hand to receive the bounty of their host. Refreshed by food and drink, she then began to attack the obstinacy of her mistress. "What good will it do you to die of hunger?" she asked, "or to bury yourself alive, or to surrender an uncondemned spirit before the fates demand it? Think you the ashes or sepultured dead can feel aught of thy woe? Would you recall the dead from the reluctant fates? Why not shake off this womanish weakness, and enjoy the blessings of light while you can? The very corpse lying there ought to convince you that your duty is to live. When pressed to eat or to live, no one listens unwillingly, and the lady, thirsty after an abstinence of several days, finally permitted her obstinacy to be overcome, nor did she take her fill of nourishment with less avidity than had the maid who had surrendered first. But to make a long story short, you know the temptations that beset a full stomach. The soldier laid siege to her virtue with the selfsame blandishments by which he had persuaded her that she ought to live, nor, to her modest eye, did the young man seem uncouth or wanting in address. The maid pled in his behalf, and kept repeating, "Why will you fight with a passion that to you is pleasure, remembering not in whose lands you are taking your leisure? But why should I keep you longer in suspense?" The lady observed the same abstinence when it came to this part of her body, and the victorious soldier won both of his objectives. So they lay together, not only that night, in which they pledged their vows, but also the next, and even the third, shutting the doors of the vault, of course, so that anyone, acquaintance or stranger, coming to the tomb, would be convinced that this most virtuous of wives had expired upon the body of her husband. As for the soldier, so delighted was he with the beauty of his mistress and the secrecy of the intrigue, that he purchased all the delicacies his pay permitted, and smuggled them into the vault as soon as darkness fell. Meanwhile, The parents of one of the crucified criminals, observing the laxness of the watch, dragged the hanging corpse down at night and performed the last rite. The soldier was hoodwinked while absent from his post of duty, and when on the following day he caught sight of one of the crosses without its corpse, he was in terror of punishment, and explained to the lady what had taken place. He would await no sentence of court-martial, but would punish his neglect of duty with his own sword. Let her prepare a place for one about to die. Let that fatal vault serve both the lover and the husband. Not that, cried out the lady, no less merciful than chaste. The gods forbid that I should look at the same time upon the corpses of the two men dearest to me. I would rather hang the dead than slay the living. So saying, she gave orders for the body of her husband to be lifted out of the coffin and fastened upon the vacant cross. The soldier availed himself of the expedient suggested by this very ingenious lady, and next day everyone wondered how a dead man had found his way to the cross.
Okay, that was funny. I'm not gonna lie. That whole entire part with the Satyricon, that was like, hilarious. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next miracle that is attributed to Jesus Christ is the miracle of healing the blind. So according to John chapter 9, it says right here, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciple asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, is that was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might display in him. As long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming. Now, when no one else can work, when I'm in the world, I am the light of this world. After saying that, he spit on the ground, made some mud in the saliva, and put it into his eyes. Go, he said, washed in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So the man sent and washed and came back seeing. So what are some examples, I guess you guys will probably be asking, like what are some examples of people in the ancient Greco-Roman world having blindness and having sight again? One of the most famous examples actually is a person named Asclepius. He was actually known to being like the god of healing. So here are some quotations directly from Asclepius that I'm going to share with you guys.
121 to 122, Stele 1.4 Ambrosia from Athens, blind of one eye. She came as a supplicant to the god. As she walked about in the temple she laughed at some of the cures as incredible and impossible, that the lame and the blind should be healed by merely seeing a dream. In her sleep she had a vision. It seemed to her that the god stood by her and said that he would cure her, but that in payment he would ask her to dedicate to the temple a silver pig as a memorial of her ignorance. After saying this, he cut the diseased eyeball and poured in some drug. When day came she walked out sound. The man with no eye but only an eye socket. 1.6. Ignoring people's derision, the man with only an eye socket trusted in Asclepios, and the god restored his eye. Inscriptions Graece 4.1.121 to 122, Stele 1.9 A man came as a supplicant to the god. He was so blind that of one of his eyes he had only the eyelids left, within them was nothing, but they were entirely empty. Some of those in the temple laughed at his silliness to think that he could recover his sight when one of his eyes had not even a trace of the ball, but only the socket. As he slept a vision appeared to him. It seemed to him that the god prepared some drug, then, opening his eyelids, poured it into them. When day came he departed with the sight of both eyes restored. Gods and heroes who heal. Alcitas the blind man. 1.7. Alcitas dreams that Asclepios opens his eyes with his fingers. Inscriptions Graece 4.1.121 to 122, Stele 1.18. Alciras of Haliais. The blind man saw a dream. It seemed to him that the god came up to him and with his fingers opened his eyes, and that he first saw the trees in the sanctuary. At daybreak he walked our sound. Hermann's blindness is healed. 1.8. Hermann has his blindness return until he returns to thank Asclepios. Inscriptions Graeae 4.1.121 to 122, Stele 2.22 Hermann of Thasus. His blindness was cured by Asclepios. But, since afterwards he did not bring the thank offerings, the god made him blind again.
So those were the examples of Asclepius, where it's basically it's like the god of healing. And let's get back to the slideshow. So walking on water. So let's go to Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 to 23. Immediately Jesus made the disciple get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, where he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up to the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the waves were against it. And it continues to say right here, shortly after dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, it is you, Peter replied. Tell me to come to you on the water. Then Peter got out the boat, walked in the water, came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink and cried out, Lord, help me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why do you doubt? So there's actually one famous person that can actually walk on water. The most famous Greek god that basically can just walk on water is actually a character named Orion, among many other characters.
From Pseudo-Eratosthenes Catastrophismi Fragment 32. Hesiod says that he was the son of Euryale, the daughter of Minos, and of Poseidon, and that there was given him as a gift the power of walking upon the waves as though upon land. When he was come to Chios, he outraged Merope, the daughter of Oenopion, being drunken, but Oenopion when he learned of it was greatly vexed at the outrage and blinded him and cast him out of the country. Then he came to Lemnos as a beggar, and there met Hephaestus, who took pity on him and gave him Kedalion, his own servant, to guide him. So Orion took Kedalion upon his shoulders and used to carry him about while he pointed out the roads. Then he came to the east and appears to have met Helios, the sun, and to have been healed, and so returned back again to Oenopion to punish him, but Oenopion was hidden away by his people underground. Being disappointed, then, in his search for the king, Orion went away to Crete and spent his time hunting in company with Artemis and Leto. It seems that he threatened to kill every beast there was on earth, whereupon, in her anger, Gaia, the earth, sent up against him a scorpion of very great size, by which he was stung and so perished. After this Zeus, at the prayer of Artemis and Leto, put him among the stars, because of his manliness, and the scorpion also as a memorial of him and of what had occurred.
After them from Taenarus came Euphemus, whom...
By the way, this whole entire book is like Jason and the Argonauts. This whole entire book actually inspired a movie that came out during the 1960s, based upon the same sort of material that we know from that we have right now. Now, there's actually one of a son that's like, his name, I cannot remember the name right now, but essentially one of the sons of Poseidon also has the ability to walk on water. And so you guys will probably hear this story directly of him walking on water here too.
Most swift-footed of men, Europe, daughter of mighty Tityus, bare to Poseidon. He was wont to skim the swell of the grey sea, and wetted not his swift feet, but just dipping the tips of his toes was borne on the watery path. Book 5.
Now, the character that walks on water for the Odyssey is actually known as Hermes. And basically, Hermes works together with Zeus, and he has sandals while he walks on the water.
Now Dawn arose from her couch from beside lordly Tithonus, to bear light to the immortals and to mortal men. And the gods were sitting down to council, and among them Zeus, who thunders on high, whose might is supreme. To them Athene was recounting the many woes of Odysseus, as she called them to mind. For it troubled her that he remained in the dwelling of the nymph. Father Zeus, and you other blessed gods that are forever, never henceforward let sceptred king with a ready heart be kind and gentle, nor let him heed righteousness in his mind, but let him ever be harsh and deal unjustly, seeing that no one remembers divine Odysseus of the people whose lord he was, although gentle was he as a father. Yet he lies in an island, suffering grievous pains in the halls of the nymph Calypso, who keeps him perforce, and he cannot return to his own land, for he has at hand no ships with oars, and no comrades to send him on his way over the broad back of the sea. And now again they are minded to slay his well-loved son on his homeward way, for he went in quest of tidings of his father to sacred Pylos, and to splendid Lacedaemon. Then Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, answered her, and said,
My child, what a word has escaped the barrier of your teeth? Did you not yourself devise this plan, that in all truth Odysseus might take vengeance on these men at his coming? But concerning Telemachus, guide him in your wisdom, for you have the power, that all unscathed he may reach his native land, and the suitors may come back in their ship baffled in their purpose.
He spoke, and said to Hermes, his loyal son,
Hermes, seeing that you are at other times our messenger, declare to the fair-tressed nymph our fixed resolve, the return of steadfast Odysseus, that he may return with guidance neither of gods nor of mortal men, but that on a stoutly bound raft, suffering woes, he may come on the 20th day to deep-soiled Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, who are near of kin to the gods. These shall heartily show him all honour, as if he were a god, and shall send him in a ship to his own native land, after giving him stores of bronze and gold and clothing, more than Odysseus would ever have won for himself from Troy, if he had returned unscathed with his due share of the spoil. For in this manner it is his fate to see his own people, and reach his high-roofed house and his native land.
So he spoke, and the guide, Aegepontes, did not fail to obey. At once he bound beneath his feet his beautiful sandals, immortal, golden, which bore him over the waters of the sea and over the boundless land, swift as the blasts of the wind.
4.12 I saw a Hyperborean magician walk on water, see Mark 6, 45-52. Lucian of Samosata. Circa 120-190 CE, the lover of lies 13. Said Cleodemus, I myself was formerly more incredulous than you in regard to such things wonders, for I thought it in no way possible that they could happen, but when first I saw the foreign stranger fly, he came from the land of the Hyperboreans, he said, I believed and was conquered. After long resistance, what was I to do when I saw him soar through the air in broad daylight, and walk on the water, and go through fire slowly on foot? Did you see that? Said I, the Hyperborean, flying, or stepping on the water? Certainly, said he, with brogues on his feet such as people of that country commonly wear.
So yeah, those are the examples of other characters that can also just walk on water. So the next example that we have right here is turning water into wine. Now, according to John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, it says right here, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples also had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they had no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them with the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take them to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that has been turned into wine. He did not realize it had not come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone bring out the choice wine first, and the cheaper wine after the guests had too much wine, but he had been saved the best until now." So, one humongous example of a character that can also be like a god of wine is actually Dionysus. He is like one of the most well known of the gods of the ancient period that can also turn things
Natural
into wine.
history. It is accredited by the Mucianus, who was 3 times consul, that the water flowing from a spring in the temple of Father Liber, Dionysus, on the island of Andros always has the flavor of wine. On January 5th, the day is called God's Gift Day. 3.53. On fixed 7-day festivals of the god, the springs flow with wine. Pliny the Elder, Natural History 2. Disgust wine, says Eudoxus, comes upon those who have drunk of lake. Clitorius, but Theopompus says that drunkenness is caused by the springs that I have mentioned, and Mucianus that at Andros, from the spring of Father Liber, Dionysus, on fixed 7-day festivals of this god, flows wine. But if its water is carried out of sight of the temple, the taste turns to that of wrote 60 to 30 BCE. 3.51. The teens claim as proof that Dionysus was born in their city that periodic fountains of wine spurt from the earth. Diodorus Siculus, The Library of History 3.66.31. The teens advance as proof that the god Dionysus was born among them the fact that, even to this day, at fixed times in their city a fountain of wine, of unusually sweet fragrance, flows of its own accord from the earth, and as for the peoples of the other cities, they in some cases point out a plot of land which is sacred to Dionysus, in other cases shrines and sacred precincts which have been consecrated to him from ancient times. But, speaking generally, since the god has left behind him in many places over the inhabited world evidences of his personal favor and presence, it is not surprising that in each case the people should think that Dionysus had had a peculiar relationship to both their city and country.
So, of course, the most famous example of all the bunch is the idea of the virgin birth. So, this comes directly from Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 to 25. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother has been bestowed into Joseph before they came together, she found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being just a man, and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But he considered these things, and behold, an angel of the Lord reappeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus, for she will save the people from their sins." And he took this place to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophet. "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his son Emmanuel," which means God with us. But when Joseph woke from asleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him to do. He took his wife, but he knew not until she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. There are at least 3 different examples that I have right here of characters directly from Greek mythology that also have the idea of miraculous conception.
Bibliotheca 3. 118 to 122. Leucippus, also was the father of Arsinoe. Apollon, Apollo, had sex with her, and she bore him Asclepius, Asclepios. Some say, however, that Asclepius was not born of Leucippos' daughter Arsinoe, but rather of Phlegyas' daughter Coronis, in Thessalia, Thessaly. Apollon fell in love with her and immediately had intercourse with her, but she, despite her father's advice, preferred Caeneus, Senus, son Aeschys, and lived with him. When a raven told Apollon this, he cursed it and turned it black in place of the white it had been before, and he killed Coronis. As she was being consumed on her funeral pyre, he snatched her baby Fire and took him to the Centauros Chiron, Centaur Chiron, who reared him and taught him medicine and hunting. Pseudo Apollodoros, Bibliotheca 3. 26-28. Zeus fell in love with Semele and slept with her, promising her anything she wanted, and keeping it all from Hera. But Semele was deceived by Hera into asking Zeus to come to her as he came to Hera during their courtship.
By the way, this is actually the birth of Dionysus for this particular story. That's the context right here.
So Zeus, unable to refuse, arrived in her bridal chamber in a chariot with lightning flashes and thunder, and sent a thunderbolt at her. Semele died of fright, and Zeus grabbed from the fire her 6-month aborted baby, which he sewed into his thigh. After Semele's death, the remaining daughters of Cadmus, circulated the story that she had slept with a mortal, thereafter accusing Zeus, and because of this had been killed by a thunderbolt. At the proper time Zeus loosened the stitches and gave birth to Dionysus, whom he entrusted to Hermes. On Plato and His Doctrine. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Habitude of body gave a surname to Plato, for he was first called Aristocles, and his father is said to have been Aesto. Moreover, Pyrrhiction, the daughter of Glaucus, was his mother, and from both his nobility was very illustrious. For his father Aristo drew his origin from Neptune through Codrus, and his maternal blood was derived from the most wise Solon, who was the founder of the Attic laws. There are also those who relate that Plato descended from a more august conception, since a certain spectre of Apollo had connection with Pyrrhiction. He was likewise born in the month which is called by the Athenians Targelian, i.e. April, and on the same day in which Latona is said to have brought forth Apollo and Diana, in the island Delos. We learn that Socrates was born the day before him. An admirable dream also of Socrates is related, for he appeared to himself to have seen the offspring of a swan fly from the altar, which in the Academy is sacred to Cupid, and seat itself in his breast, and that afterwards that swan extended its wings towards the heavens, alluring the ears both of men and gods by its harmonious voice. While Socrates was narrating this dream to an assembly of men.
Birth of Heracles.
By the way, just off topic a little bit before we continue on, Hercules is by far one of my favorite of the Greek gods, without questions. Like when I was younger, I just used to watch like the Hercules movie that came out from Disney. It was like my jam when I was growing up. And so I would say of all the stories of the Greek gods out there, Hercules is by far one of my favorite ones.
Electrion, son of Perseus, High King of Mycenae and husband of Anaxo, marched vengefully against the Taphians and Teleboans. They had joined in a successful raid on his cattle, planned by one Telereus, a claimant to the Mycenaean throne, which had resulted in the death of Electrion's 8 sons. While he was away, his nephew, King Amphitryon of Troezen, acted as regent. "Rule well, and when I return victorious, you shall marry my daughter Alcmene," Electrion cried in farewell. Amphitryon, informed by the king of Elis that the stolen cattle were now in his possession, paid the large ransom demanded, and recalled Electrion to identify them. Electrion, by no means pleased to learn that Amphitryon expected him to repay his ransom, asked harshly what right had the Eleans to sell stolen property, and why did Amphitryon condone in a fraud? Disdaining to reply, Amphitryon vented his annoyance by throwing a club at one of the cows which had strayed from the herd. It struck her horns, rebounded, and killed Electrion. Thereupon Amphitryon was banished from Argolis by his uncle Sthenelus, who seized Mycenae and Tiryns and entrusted the remainder of the country, with Mydia for its capital, to Atreus and Thyestes, the son of Pelops. Amphitryon, accompanied by Alcmene, fled to Thebes, where King Creon purified him, and gave his sister Perimede in marriage to Electrion's only surviving son, Lysimnius, a bastard born by a Phrygian woman named Medea. But the pious Alcmene would not lie with Amphitryon until he had avenged the death of her 8 brothers. Creon therefore gave permission to raise a Boeotian army for this purpose, on condition that he freed Thebes of the Taemessian vixen, which he did by borrowing the celebrated hound Lelaps from Cephalus the Athenian. Then, aided by Athenian, Phocian, Argive, and Locrian contingents, Amphitryon overcame the Teleboans and Taphians, and bestowed their islands on his allies, among them his uncle Helios. Meanwhile, Zeus, taking advantage of Amphitryon's absence, impersonated him, and assuring Alcmene that her brothers were now avenged, since Amphitryon had indeed gained the required victory that very morning, lay with her all one night, to which he gave the length of 3. For Hermes, at Zeus's command, had ordered Helios to quench the solar fires, have the hours unyoke his team, and spend the following day at home, because the procreation of so great a champion as Zeus had in mind could not be accomplished in haste. Helios obeyed, grumbling about the good old times when day was day and night was night, and when Cronus, the then almighty god, did not leave his lawful wife and go off to Thebes on love adventures. Hermes next ordered the moon to go slowly, and sleep to make mankind so drowsy that no one would notice what was happening. Alcmene, wholly deceived, listened delightedly to Zeus's account of the crushing defeat inflicted on Telereus at Oechalia, and sported innocently with her supposed husband for the whole 36 hours. On the next day, when Amphitryon returned, eloquent of victory and his passion for her, Alcmene did not welcome him to the marriage couch so rapturously as he had hoped. "We never slept a wink last night," she complained, "and surely you do not expect me to listen twice to the story of your exploits." Amphitryon, unable to understand these remarks, consulted the seer Tiresias, who told him that he had been cuckolded by Zeus, and thereafter he never dared sleep with Alcmene again, for fear of incurring divine jealousy.
Just on a side note, like I kind of lost track of how many times like Zeus just slept with women and tricked them into sleeping with him. It's like been probably like hundreds and hundreds of times for that to happen. But let's continue.
9 months later, on Olympus, Zeus happened to boast that he had fathered a son, now at the point of birth, who would be called Heracles, which means glory of Hera, and rule the noble house of Perseus. Hera thereupon made him promise that any prince born before nightfall to the house of Perseus should be high king. When Zeus swore an unbreakable oath to this effect, Hera went at once to Mycenae, where she hastened the pangs of Nicippe, wife of King Sthenelus. She then hurried to Thebes, and squatted cross-legged at Alcmene's door, with her clothing tied into knots, and her fingers locked together, by which means she delayed the birth of Heracles, until Eurystheus, son of Sthenelus, a 7 months' child, already lay in his cradle. When Heracles appeared 1 hour too late, he was found to have a twin named Iphicles, Amphitryon's son and the younger by night. But some say that Heracles, not Iphicles, was the younger by night, and others that the twins were begotten on the same night, and born together, and that Father Zeus divinely illumined the birth chamber. At first, Heracles was called Alcaeus, or Palemon.
So let's get back to the slideshow right here. So, now one aspect that Jesus has is the aspect of calming the seas. So, according to Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27, it says right here, "And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, 'Save us, Lord, we are perishing.' And he said to them, 'Why are you afraid, O you little faith?' And he rose and rebuked the waves in the sea, and there was a great calm. And the man marveled, saying, 'What sort of man is this, that even waters and sea obey him?'" So let's look at some examples of, again, basically these Greek gods calming the seas, just like with the case of Jesus Christ.
Homeric hymns, to the Dioscuri bright-eyed muses, tell of the Tyndaridae, the sons of Zeus. Glenus children of near-ankled Leda, Castor Tuna Olorses, and Lundu, when Leda had lamb with the dark-clouded son of Cronos, she bare them beneath the peak of the great hill Taygetus, children who are the deliverers of men on earth and of swift-going ships. Wall sorts clothing. Then the specules, tci chin with vows of white lambs, going to the forepart of the prow, but the strong wind and the waves of the sea lay the ship under water, until suddenly these two are seen darting through the air on tawny wings. Forthwith they allay the blasts of the cruel winds and still the waves upon the surface of the white sea, fair signs are they and deliverance from toil. And when the latest hat and have rest from their pain and labour, hail Tyndande, riders upon swift hearses. Coo will rehome cool and other soft too. 3.5. A hymn to the Dioscuri, who calm sea storms. Theocritus 300-260 bot, Funtug Dason 0714-377. Night comes, and with it a great storm from the sky, and the troll rates a plashes with the battery of the blast and of the irresistible hail. But for all that, 18,11, do draw both sup and despairungs a packet from out thel that will life, the stalpets and sun calm, the clouds air still use with it in. Cass. Cut cone? So that Vlazu done ends one turn for touring on the skull and he was.
The Aeneid. By Virgil. Translated by Patrick Dickinson. Book 1. Of arms I sing, and the hero, Destiny's exile, who came from the beach of Troy, and was the first to make the Lavinian landfall, Italy, who, in the grip of immortal powers, was pounded by land and sea to sate the implacable hatred of Juno, who suffered bitterly in his battles as he strove for the sight of his city and safe harboring for his gods in Latium, himself the father-founder of his race, of the Alban chiefs, of the towers of Rome. Then, Muse, remind us, what was the root cause of the goddess's wrath? What had he done that a queen of heaven should break on such wheels of disaster a man so patently pious? Is it a god's nature to nurse an abiding fury? There was an ancient city, a colony of Tyre, which stood on the African coast fronting across the sea the mouth of the Tiber and the port of Rome. A wealthy city, with a war-tempered army, a city Juno favoured of all the world the most. Her Samos even was second, and here she kept her arms, and here she kept her chariot, and here, if the fates allowed, she yearned to see a city ruling the world, and in her heart already she was furthering, fostering this. But she had heard of a race to spring from the blood of a Trojan lord, that in due time would wreck that Tyrian stronghold, and down its throat of empire swallow Libya. She feared this, Juno, and remembered still the old campaign against Troy she had prosecuted so vigorously in her affection for Argus. Rage and chagrin boiled in her breast unabated. The judgment of Paris rankled as bitterly. That insult to her beauty, that hated people, that stolen Ganymede, loaded with honors. So, those poor refugees, the remnant left by the Greeks and brutal Achilles, were tossed on the mid-sea surges, as she kept them off from Latium. Thus for years they quartered the unmapped water, flotsam of fate. To found the Roman people so titanic an effort was needful. Just out of sight of Sicily, full sail with a fair wind, the ships were scudding along, the bright spray flying, when Juno, nursing the quenchless wound in her heart, said to herself, "Am I to be defeated, deprived of my spoil? Am I to be impotent to prevent this Trojan princeling landing in Italy, simply because the fates appear to forbid it? Did not Athene burn the Argive fleet and drown their sailors, and for no more reason than the frenzy of Ajax? Did she not dare herself to hurl Jove's instant thunderbolt from the clouds, smash the ships, whip up the sea with a whirlwind, and suck the man up, lightning-struck to the heart, as he gasped out the fire, and impale him on a rock point? But I, who am queen of heaven, sister and wife to Jove, must I battle for years with a single nation? Who will worship me for the future? What suppliant lay a gift on my failing altar? The cauldron of her indignation still seething, the goddess came to storm-inhabited Aeolia, native region of raging gales, for it is here that King Aeolus holds in thrall the rampant moaning tempests, shackled, imprisoned in a colossal cave. In muffled fury, they chafe and rumble in the mountain's bowels, while Aeolus sits, sceptre in hand, above on his high battlement, soothing and calming them. Were he to fail, they would sweep away land and sea, and even the vault of heaven itself into thin air. Aware of this, Jove the king thrust them down into subterranean dark, heaped mountains on them, and over them set a lord whose genius lay in his power to adjust them to the nicety of his king's wishes. And to him it was that Juno, speaking humbly, made her plea. "Aeolus, you were granted by the father of gods and king of men the faculty of calming wind and wave. Now listen to me. A people I abominate are afloat on the Tuscan sea, bearing to Italy Troy and its conquered gods. Now lash the sea to frenzy, shatter their ships and sink them, scatter them utterly, sow the deep sea furrows with all their bodies. I have twice 7 nymphs, all beautiful, most beautiful Diopeia, and for this favour she shall be yours for life in proper marriage, and bear your family." Aeolus answered, "Goddess, it is your destiny to ensue your will. My duty is to obey it. My kingdom is in your gift, my place at your feasts. You make me Sib to Almighty Jove. My dominion over storm and cloudburst emanates from you." When he had said this, he turned his stave over and dug it into the ribs of the mountain. Then the winds, snuffing an outlet, as if in assault order, swirled out and swept the land in a hurricane, whirled on the sea and whisked it deep to its bed.
As you can see, the motif is a little different. As you can see, like the Roman god has the ability to calm the winds, but basically what happens in the story is that Zeus is asking the opposite to not calm the winds down. So that's the major difference between the story and also that what we see for the case of Jesus Christ. The second to last example is The Walking Dead. I'm not joking, by the way. You guys, you've seen the show like The Walking Dead where there's like zombies. Well, we actually have zombies for the case of the book of Matthew. So, according to Matthew chapter 27, verse 51, it says, "At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn into two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rock split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who have died were raised to life. They came out the tomb after Jesus Christ's resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people." Like I said before, they're like zombies. But anyway, what are some examples of these kind of motifs where people just come directly from the graves prior to what we see in the Gospels?
Bibliotheca 3. 118 to 122. As a surgeon, Asclepius became so skilled in his profession that he not only saved lived but even revived the dead, for he had received from Athena the blood that had coursed through the Gorgon's veins, the left side portion of which he used to destroy people, but that on the right he used for their preservation, which is how he could revive those who had died. The sun darkened, gave out a lurid light over the troubled earth. Often firebrands were seen, burning in the midst of the stars. Often drops of blood rained from the clouds. Lucifer, the morning star, was dulled, with rust-black spots on his disk, and the moon's chariot was spattered with blood.
For the whole entire quotation right now comes directly from the story called Metamorphosis, excuse me. It comes directly from chapter 15. It was written by Ovid. He was like the person that wrote Metamorphosis during that time period.
The Stygian owl sounded its sad omens in 1,000 places. In 1,000 places ivory statues wept, and incantations, and warning words, were said to have been heard in the sacred groves. No sacrifice was favorable, and the livers were found with cleft lobes, among the entrails, warning of great and impending civil conflict. In the forum, and around men's houses, and the temples of the gods, dogs howled at night, and they say the silent dead walked.
Basically, when I say the phrase like silent dead is again referring to zombies. Now, this is actually in the direct reference to the death of Julius Caesar in the context of chapter 15. So, the context of chapter 15 is that Julius Caesar dies in Metamorphosis, and then suddenly, like a lot of stuff happened, including like zombies coming from the graves, according to the story. Now, the final example for tonight is actually snake handling. Yeah, figure, right? So it says in Mark chapter 16, verse 18, that they will pick up the snakes with their hands, and when they drink the deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people, and they will get well. There's only one example of actually a case where there's a story that involves snake handling in the ancient Greek world. So here's like the one example that we have right here.
Elder. 4.6. Persons who practice witchcraft are able to handle snakes and cure snakebite. Pliny the Elder, Natural History, the 28th of June 2030 to 33 persons possessed of powers of witchcraft and of the evil eye, along with many peculiar characteristics of animals I have spoken of when dealing with the marvels of the nations. It is superfluous to go over the ground again. Of certain men the whole bodies are beneficent, for example the members of those families that frighten serpents.
So yes, everybody, I hope I made my whole entire case for my video presentation. So in short, students back in the past, what they would do were to be trained directly by these leaders to rewrite stories. And once they were trained to rewrite stories, they would try to apply their personal skills into other aspects of life. And so we kind of see it kind of manifest in various aspects of the Gospels for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John when it comes down to using motifs. I want to further emphasize that I'm not necessarily against the idea of following the ideas and the philosophy of of Jesus Christ, right? So basically, for the case of Jesus Christ, I think the ideas of loving your neighbor is actually a good idea. I also think that the ideas of the Sermon on the Mount is also really good. So although I consider myself to be an atheist, I consider myself to be like a cultural Christian in the sense that I actually, partake and like appreciate like a lot of aspects of the Christian culture that we have around us, right? Because basically there are some questions to atheists like myself, which are basically why is it that you actually celebrate Christmas every single year? And it's not going to be like hard to answer that particular question. And I would say like the main reason why people like me continue to celebrate Christmas is largely because our culture is largely influenced directly by Christianity. It affects both non-believers in the Western sphere, and it also kind of affects directly the believers too, because in terms of like hospitals, in terms of the fact that you don't want to work directly on the weekends, the fact that of course the Protestant work ethic, there's like a lot of aspect in Western society, I would say, that are directly largely influenced by the ideas of Christianity that still affects us to this very day. And so for me to celebrate something like Easter, to celebrate something like Christmas, to celebrate something like, like Halloween, I would say those particular aspects are largely based upon cultural traditions and cultural traditions that I personally appreciate, even as somebody who doesn't necessarily buy into the ideas of the supernatural. Now, I would say there's like a two types of like, kind of people for Christendom for various parts of the West. There's of course the Bible believing Christians, and they have their own personal denominations, and basically they believe that the supernatural elements are true. And then there are those like me who are basically like the cultural Christians, the people who don't necessarily believe this kind of stuff, but still appreciate the culture. And so I still think it's entirely possible to apply the ideas and philosophy of Jesus without having to necessarily buy into the ideas of the supernatural. And so I think it's actually a good idea to follow the guy, but not believe in the miracles. So that's why I made the whole entire video for this particular Christmas. I'm not against the idea of Christmas. I'm not against the idea of Jesus. I just want to show you guys that the miracles that we see are largely direct motifs that come directly from other pre-existing literature. But what do you guys think? Tell me in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see you guys next time. Merry Christmas.